Hello, everybody, and welcome to Shannon Q. I think I have myself unmuted. I do, and yay, nailed it. Nailed it. Who said it couldn't be done? I can start a stream without audio issues. Don't tell me I can't start a stream without audio issues. How long does it count before the start of the stream is over? Well, welcome. Today we are going to be having a conversation with a friend of mine who is a friend of the channel who has been on here before. So if you like what you see, go check him out here. Go check out the links in the description. We're going to get into it a little bit further. Without further ado, I am going to let him introduce himself. I'm going to bring him up so everybody can see his handsome face. It is Dr. Joshua Bowen. Hi, Dr. Josh. Thank you for being here.
Of course. Thank you for having me on.
Why don't you tell everybody before we get into your new book, the Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament? I probably said that wrong because you got it in my head that somebody else had done that.
Perfect.
Yes. Woo-hoo. Before we get into that, I have a million questions. Why don't you tell everybody who you are and where they can find you?
Sure. Thank you very much. This is exciting. Glad to be back. So I'm Joshua Bowen. I was an evangelical Christian for 25, 26 years. Grew up in the church, pastored a church for 7 years. I went and got a bachelor's in religion, a master's in theology, and then I went to Johns Hopkins University, deconverted. I got my PhD in ancient Near Eastern studies, focusing on ancient Mesopotamia, so Assyriology, with a minor in Hebrew Bible. So I do, lots of ancient Near Eastern stuff, read Sumerian, Akkadian, Hebrew, Aramaic, all that other fun stuff. That's what I like to do. I'm very nerdy, I guess, in that respect. But my wife runs a really cool channel called Digital Hammurabi, and I help her out on that, but she's really running with it, which is awesome. She's formed a nonprofit, so she provides scholarships to PhD students who are in ancient Near Eastern studies to get them through summer months. So we're over at Digital Hammurabi, HAMMURABI, on YouTube and digitalhammurabi.com. And I'm on Twitter, DJ Hammurabi1, I think is my name. So yeah.
Well, I'm psyched to have you here. I'm an OG fan. I've been a fan of the channel for, as you know, for a very long time, and we've been friends for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So I own all of your books. I've been currently reading your newest book, the Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament, and all the links that he mentioned below are in the description below, including the link to the new book, which is what I want to get into. So my first question to you is, sir, what motivated you to write this book, address this topic in particular? Was it that you saw people in the atheist community and the theistic community and the debate community having conversations that entailed a poor understanding of scholarship, or why? What?
It really started with when I first started listening to YouTube. I was out at a job and I had some free time, and so I was watching a couple of YouTube videos while I was waiting for some work to get done. And it was Aaron Ra, I think is who I was watching, and Aaron was talking about evolution. Anyway, he was talking with somebody, a Christian apologist, and they challenged him. I'm like, oh, well, the Greek says this or the Hebrew says this, and I went, but no, it doesn't. It doesn't say that. But of course, Aaron is, like his specialization. That's not his area of expertise.
Mm-hmm.
So he was like, well, and I thought, well, Aaron's right here, And so as I continued to watch, and I started watching other atheists in the community and their interactions with Christian apologists, the same sort of thing would happen. So atheists would say something like, or skeptics would say something like, look, here in 1 Samuel 15, God commands, Saul to kill all the Amalekites, including the women and children. How can you, serve a God like that? How can you say that his morality is the basis for your values? And they would say, well, do you know the context of that? Because, and if the skeptic didn't know the detailed context of who the Amalekites were, then it was like, oh, well, this was perfectly justified. And it's like, well, no, The skeptic's right here. This is problematic, however you come at this. And so that's, after we got onto YouTube, doing videos, started tackling some of these topics, like slavery and genocide and dating of certain books and those sorts of things, prophecy.
Yeah.
And I thought, I should put something together that's like a one-stop shop resource for people that are interested, for skeptics and for atheists that are interested in having these types of discussions, either with people at the dinner table around Thanksgiving dinner, or, coming and doing a formal debate with somebody online. I wanted them to have a really solid background information to the ancient Near East and the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, and then more detailed information about some hot topic issues.
Right.
And so that was that's what motivated the book.
So they can't be dazzled with rhetorical trickery when just because they're not an expert in Assyriology. Yeah. One of the things that I loved about the book, like right away, was that one of the first things that you lay out, I think it's even in the introduction, is that you are going to cite a lot of other scholars, like the classic Dr. Josh. This isn't my area of expertise. This is not my area of expertise. But that's really important in a book like this, because in a lot of instances, you could be subject to the criticism that, okay, well, that's just your take on this particular passage, or that's your take on this particular interpretation. But instead of just putting your take as an expert in the field, as a subject matter expert, you incorporated a lot of other people's scholarship so that they could see the broad consensus across fields. And I appreciated that so much. Thank you for doing it. and I'm glad that you were motivated to do so. It shows that you have a degree of integrity, that you didn't want to publish something that wasn't scholarship. So I'm preemptively stomping that criticism down, because anybody who reads the book knows right away you set the groundwork that it's going to be filled with citations. So thank you for doing it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the nice thing about it is that in the end, I cite liberally as like that low end liberally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody. And that includes, liberal scholars, whatever that might mean to you, and evangelical scholars, right? So like in the chapter on slavery, there's this, believe it or not, for those of you listening, slavery is not debated in academic circles the way that in the Hebrew Bible, the way that it's debated online.
Right.
There's just, I don't even want to call it broad consensus. It's just like near universal consensus. And so I remember when I wrote my book, Did the Old Testament Endorse Slavery, which came before this one. When I got to that passage in Leviticus 25 about the foreign slaves, before I even said anything, I have like 4 pages of just individual quotes by scholars. And I said, look, I'm just going to show you what everybody says about this. Boom, 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 boom. And after about 20, I'm hoping that the reader's like, okay, I know that name. I know that name. I know that name. He's on my team.
Yeah.
And he's saying this. And so I think that idea, is brought to the book, because consensus in these types of topics, these aren't dissertation level issues that we're talking about. Whether this fine, possibly consensus overturning, nuanced argument that a PhD student will write in his dissertation. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about what is it that people say about the prophecy of Tyre? Like, what is it that people say about the dating of the book of Daniel? What is the consensus? And for somebody that's not in the field, it can be very difficult to know that. And so that's sort of the point of each chapter, is to say, look, I'm not talking about stuff that's like hotly debated in academic circles. I'm giving you what everybody says about this.
Yeah.
And here they are. So
Yeah, I love that because in this day and age too, I find so many people are or can be skeptical even of scholarship because they see people as having ulterior motives, right?
mhm,
Like you went to Liberty University, and I
mhm,
know that they have a statement of faith, for example. So if somebody goes to a university with that has a statement of faith, and I'm not sure that I fully disagree with this, I'm not sure where I fall yet. There's this perception that they're preconditioned to have certain conclusions about their scholarship, for example, and vice versa. There's scholars like people like Richard Carrier, for example, that are kind of hotly contested scholars because they exist on the fringes. So when
mhm.
people are constantly kind of debating the validity of even the credentials of scholars, it's nice to see a book where you kind of take people from both teams and put them together to say, hey, look, this is all of the things that everybody, regardless of,
Yeah,
statement of faith, fringe position, wherever you fall, everyone agrees on these
yeah,
things. Like, why are we debating these things?
yeah. That's right. That's right. And it's really, I think it's something that people. What I hope is that when they pick up the book and they read, let me say it this way: when I listen to Joel Baden talk, if you've heard Joel
Oh,
Baden at the
yeah, I
Yale
love
University,
him. Tell
he's
him I love
amazing.
him.
I
I'd
will. I
love to
definitely
talk to
will.
him one day.
Yeah,
He's the
absolutely.
best.
I'll definitely let him know. But like when you hear him say something, like he goes on Myth Vision podcast, or you read something in one of
He's
his
fun
books, and
to
he's
listen to.
yeah. I mean, like one of the few scholars that I know at that level that'll say the phrase "miss me with that shit."
Yeah, I know, right?
Um, and the nice thing about him is when he says, "Look, this is what scholars think about this," you can bank on it, right?
Right.
Because he's an incredibly careful scholar.
Well, he's at
And
Princeton,
does that
isn't he?
Yale?
Yale, sorry. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing, like, obviously there are things that he holds to, some areas that he's got a tremendous expertise in that he spent his entire career working on, that are debated in scholarship. Like he writes on the formation of the Pentateuch, and I talk about this in the book, that topic. But the thing is that, and I emphasize this in the book, and we might be talking about it later. I'm not sure, but
Yeah.
um, there are certain things that scholars do disagree about, sometimes quite vehemently, disagree about. But that doesn't mean that there's not this huge foundation upon which all their research is built that they all agree on.
Right.
And it's that foundation is often what I'm writing about. It's like, look, guys, let's just all get here. Can we just
It
get
must be so
here?
frustrating to watch people debate the minutiae of something that is like settled in the field.
Yes. And has been settled for sometimes centuries. Right? It's like,
Right.
come on, guys.
Yeah, like
So,
there's two separate creation stories smashed
yeah.
together. Like
Yeah. It's like,
everybody
this is
knows
not,
that.
yeah. Like, let's move on, because what's important is not, like, don't debate the data points. Those are the data points. I say this all the time. Like there's Genesis 1 is written by a priestly author, a priestly source, and Genesis 2 is not, right? It's written by somebody else, written by the Yahwist, right? So or it's written by non-priestly material, but it's two different writers, right? Or schools, or whatever you want to say. Not this, it's not Moses that wrote this, right? Those are the data points. That's where everybody's starting in the field. We
Right.
all know that. But that's what people are arguing about. And there's another debate coming up, and I'm like, oh my God, Dr. Jim Majors, the guy, he bless him. Like he takes these, the bull by the horns, and he's like, I'll debate you on that. And it's like, oh, okay, go for it, Jim. Like, man, I'm sorry. And I mean, it's just, it's one of those things that, good for him. Good for him. But man, I just, sometimes I wonder, do I have it in me to do what he does? Because,
Yeah. Well,
These are the data points.
speaking of that, just because you won't necessarily do it initially, when you're talking about the data points, what was the most cathartic thing for you to write about in the book? Like when you wrote it, you were like, "Oh, I'm finally getting this on paper so that I can just go look. Stop it."
Yeah.
What was the most cathartic topic or section?
I think the prophecy against Tyre.
Okay, why is that?
Yeah. Well, so the reason that I got into that prophecy was because there was a Mike Winger video,
Okay,
and he was responding to Aaron Ra
can you say what the
about.
prophecy against Tyre is really quickly before
Oh
we
yes, of course.
just
Yeah, sorry.
for idiots like me who
So,
may not even know?
so in the book of Ezekiel, like the prophecy against Tyre is not one that anybody listening should know. I mean, good on you if you do, but it's not like one of the real popular ones. But in Ezekiel chapter 26, Ezekiel is prophesying against the island city of Tyre. And basically what he's saying is, get ready, God's getting ready to come kick ass and take names.
Yeah.
And he is going to level you, scrape you clean, right? That island that's built on a rock, it's going to turn it into a bare rock. That's what he's going to do. And Nebuchadnezzar is going to be the one to do it. He's emphatically clear about that.
Okay.
Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, is going to do that. The problem is that never happened. Right? Nebuchadnezzar laid siege for 13 years to this island city, and we know from history never got in. Right?
Okay.
And what ultimately happened is, like, the king of Tyre eventually, in some way, capitulated, probably paid some tribute or something. Nebuchadnezzar went home.
Okay, so you heard Mike Winger talking about this, and
yeah, it's a failed prophecy, right? This is why this comes up, because it's a failed prophecy in the strict sense of when we talk about this. Ezekiel said X is going to happen, and X very clearly did not happen.
Right,
and he writes about it 3 chapters later, saying, "Well, God's going to give him Egypt instead." I mean, he recognizes that this didn't happen.
Right.
So, of course, Aaron brought this up as, look, failed prophecy. Mike responded, no, it's not failed prophecy. And he gave this long, there was one video in particular, but I think it was several videos, but one in particular was like, here's why it didn't fail. And I remember listening to it and going, like, really?
Yeah.
So then I said, all right, well, I started putting together this paper, this short little, what I thought was kind of a cute little paper. It was like 7 pages long or something, just for this purpose, to respond to this particular argument. And I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine who is an evangelical scholar out at Tyndale, out in the UK. And I went to Hopkins with him. Like, we know all the same stuff. He's an Assyriologist. And we were at a conference out in Denver. And he said, so what's going on with your YouTube channel? And I said, oh, yeah, I'm writing this paper, putting this video together about Tyre. And he said, oh, what about it? And I said, well, showing that Nebuchadnezzar was supposed to take it, and he didn't.
He was probably like, why?
He was like, why are you doing that? And I was like, oh, well, because there are people that argue that that's not what happened. He's like, wait, what? So being able, though, to really flesh that out, to take that little, cute little 7-page paper that was specifically in response to that video, and to really go full into, let's look at the literary structure of the book of Ezekiel and how it comes into chapter 26 and what we should expect from the structure of the poetic, the syntax here, and what we should expect from the structure of the poem itself. And to be able to say historically and literarily and syntactically and grammatically and all these things, one place, this puts it to rest, in my opinion. And I know that's probably a little ballsy to say, but because
considering it's settled consensus at this point,
right? Exactly. It's not me. All I'm doing is saying, look, see this scholar, he agrees with me. See this scholar, he agrees with me. Look, all these scholars, like everybody is agreeing with me.
Yeah.
And this is what they're all saying. So it's nothing groundbreaking. There's nothing groundbreaking in the book, I don't think. It's all just, let me just tell you what everybody in academia says about this, so that you can go to sleep at night and go, okay, yeah, I can bank on that.
I look forward to the day that atheists in these debates just bring up your book chapter and verse and just say,
It
Ears.
won't work. They don't, you know, the Christian apologists, man, they don't like me. They don't like
That's
me.
valid. That's fair. That's fair. At the beginning, I'm going to talk more about your book because I'm in the midst of reading it. I'm like just a little over a quarter of the way through, I think, right now, maybe closer to a third. So at the beginning of the book, this is going to be heavy on your book. Sorry. I mean, I suppose that's okay. You wrote it. But I liked at the beginning chapters, and I'm kind of curious if you did it for the reason that I think you may have. You start by setting out other literary works from the time period around the Bible was written and before, from the Middle East or the Near East, like ancient works of literature like the Enuma Elish, and you go over like the Epic of Gilgamesh, and I'm curious if you were doing that because so many people on both sides, one, like as atheists, I find can lean too into them being direct like correspondence, like one-to-one correspondence, and too many theists, like Christian theists in debates, lean into them not even being tangentially related. But there's a middle ground which you seem to find, which is the right one, the ground that scholars sit on, where it's you very eloquently articulate in the book. Actually, I'm doing the audiobook, so I'm listening to Seth Andrews' dulcet tones. While I'm going through the book. Seth Andrews is reading me your book. But you do a really elegant job, I think, of marrying the two so that people understand that these are genres and that those genres were popular and used in a certain fashion at a certain point in time in history, and that is some of where the overlap lies. Can you elaborate on if I'm kind of right there? And
You definitely are.
Okay, cool. And maybe elaborate a little bit more on why you did it so that you can articulate it better than I probably just did.
No, I think it was great. So I think that, of course, growing up a fundamentalist evangelical, the reason that the Bible was so important to me is because, like, this is the inspired, inerrant Word of God. So there were always times that, and I mean, I hear people doing this all the time, right? You want pegs that you can drive into the wall and say, that's a fixed point.
Right.
That's something that we know is true, right? Now we can start to sort of build around that. And the nice thing about having the Bible is that it's just all these pegs that I can just drive into the wall.
Right.
Like, okay, the Bible says that, that's true. Boom, done. So, things like, oh, let's read all about the Exodus and the problems with the Exodus. And is there really an actual Exodus like as portrayed in the Hebrew Bible? Doesn't that right there in Exodus, chapter 13 says that happened. Boom, right there in the wall. I don't have to worry about it. So, really diving into this historical background and trying to figure out about how these literary texts, it didn't matter. None of that was relevant to me, which, allowed me to focus in on the languages.
Yeah.
Which is, why I did. But the problem with that sort of approach is that it assumes you often end up coming away thinking that this, like particularly the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, is unique, right? In the sense that it's totally different than what you see in the wider ancient Near East. And of course, it's always argued that it's so much more progressive and it's so much, more scientific or whatever.
Yeek.
Yeah.
Eep. Okay.
and of course, the problem I think that fundamentalist evangelicals face is that, well, I'll tell you a very quick story.
Yeah.
When I deconverted, my church didn't know it. The church that I used to pastor at didn't know it. And I was, I think understandably sort of hesitant to bring that up to them because I'd pastored them for 7 years. And I was still driving back, periodically or going to church out there. I had lots of friends out there. Well, one day, one of the board members friend of mine said, hey, we need somebody to teach Sunday school on like the 17th. Can you teach the adult Sunday school class? So I thought, well, how can I stay sort of true to myself, but not be offensive. You know, what can I do? What can I talk about? And I said, well, you know what I'll do? So this was an epic failure. If you're ever in this situation, don't do this.
Where this is
I put a PowerPoint together, and on the first slide, I had like 1 Corinthians or 2 Corinthians 6 or something, and I had several verses from it, but no marking of where it came from. There's no 2 Corinthians 6 at the bottom. And I said, all right, who are my great Bible scholars out here? Who knows their Bible really well? Where's this from? And they read it, and there's a couple, that's 2 Corinthians, like it's chapter 6. Yeah, good job. So click to the next one. And it was Ezekiel chapter 1 with the whole wheels, passage there. And I was like, oh yeah, I know this is like Ezekiel like 1 or something. Yeah, that's right. Great. So I clicked it, and it said, after the flood waters receded, I sent out the raven, and the raven, danced around and whatever, didn't come back. And they were like, okay, so that's the flood. So that's like Genesis, that's probably Genesis 8, 7, 8. And I said, it's the Epic of Gilgamesh. And I said, the Epic of Gilgamesh predates the biblical text at least by 1,000 years, probably closer to 1,200.
Oh.
Silence.
You think?
Right.
You thought that was a good idea.
And then,
sweet summer child.
Finally, somebody in the back said, you don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, God.
And I was like, now what I was trying to say was, look, guys, it's bigger than what you realize, right? And what I ended up saying was, look, there are good people that are, writing about these issues, that have been writing about these issues for years and years and years. But you have to recognize that these things are here and that there are issues with them. And you have to sort of work to try to figure out theologically how you wrestle with those things.
Right.
So that's what I would say to the more fundamentalist evangelical Christian community. Look, you have to just recognize the interactions. I talked to somebody recently about the flood story, and they were like, oh, well, couldn't this mean that the flood actually happened, and that, the Mesopotamians just wrote about it earlier, and the Israelites passed it down in the oral tradition, and then later wrote about it or something? And it's like, no, it can't mean that. So yeah, I think on that side, recognizing that there's definite borrowing that takes place, there's obvious polemic that takes place, sometimes there's direct manipulation of a text. But then on the other side, there's a lot of stuff that's just in the air. Right. So I think that going to somebody like Eminem today is the example that I always give. If you go to Eminem's song today, you'll be able to pull out a lot of pop culture references, right? Mm-hmm. But I think it would be foolish to go to every song and every line and say, now, where did he pull this word from? I see this word over here. So he's obviously thinking about that. So how do I connect these two texts together? And how do I read this into? There are times that that's very obvious.
Right.
There are times that it's just in the air.
So there's things that are just kind of like part of the cultural zeitgeist that get incorporated as literary devices throughout time. That makes sense to me. I hadn't looked at it that way before. That's a good way of putting it.
There's a fantastic book out that Zioni Zevet edited. And by the way, I hear my little earpiece beeping, so it may die. So I'm going to have to dive back and get the other one.
That's okay.
But it's called Citation, Illusion, and I'm terrible with titles. Wonderful MS. But basically, it's how do we know, how do we go about determining methodologically this is borrowing from this, this is a polemic against this, and there are ways to do that. David Carr, C-A-R-R, is another phenomenal scholar that's written. If anybody's interested in like Genesis 1 through 11, the primeval history, he wrote 2 books very recently, like 2020, 2021. And one of them goes into great detail about looking at these 11 chapters and showing the connections between ancient Near Eastern literary texts and the primeval history there in Genesis, and what it's doing and how it's using it. And I think for the last thing I'll say, for the skeptic, I don't think it's the death knell to Christianity to point out the flood stories taken from Atrahasis, or is taken from Tablet 11 of Gilgamesh. I don't think that kills, destroys, or what is a defeater, whatever, for Christianity being true. So I don't put too much weight on that in that regard. Recognize that ancient Near Eastern texts do this all the time. They do this all the time.
But then they'd have to admit that it's not special and unique and divine.
Right.
Because
you would have to argue that God. You'd have to argue that God is Eminem.
Right.
Right. And
Yeah.
Because that's what's happening in the text. These Judean scribes are definitely doing this. They're definitely taking things that are in other literary texts and working them for their own, for their own usage.
Which makes sense culturally, because if you're attempting to kind of adapt to, you got to go get your. He can't hear me. Now we can say whatever we want. Oh darn. Thought I had my opportunity to just completely slay me down. Also, I saw that there's a super chat. I will ask Dr. Josh the super chat questions when I'm done with him, and I'm not done yet. But I will. I promise. I will ask him all the super chat questions.
And we started early enough, so you've 8:00 here was great. So if we need to run a little long, we definitely can.
Oh, cool. Because I still have lots more to talk to you about. But yeah, no, that does make sense to me, because if you're adapting, there's certain things that the culture and the society would be kind of ambivalent to if you're incorporating them into this sort of new version of a religion. And there's certain things that if they didn't see those things that they're familiar with and are ingrained in the culture, they would probably push up against. So that makes sense to me.
I mean, we see this, I won't go into detail. I did a video with somebody recently about this. I don't remember who. I know I've done one with Myth Vision, Derek at Myth Vision, but I've done another one. But it was with Gnostic Informant. That's who it was with.
Okay, let's check them out.
Neil, great guy, yeah. But we see this in Akkadian texts, Mesopotamian texts. So again, I won't go into any detail about this, but you have an older story called the Anzu myth, where the hero is a guy named Ninurta. Well, you mentioned the text, the Enuma Elish. Well, that's about the god Marduk. Well, what the Enuma Elish is doing is it's pulling directly from the much earlier Anzu myth and the hero Ninurta and things that are said about him, but showing Marduk, not twisting, but developing them, turning them to show Marduk to be so vastly superior to Ninurta. So much more powerful, but it's by utilizing parts of the Anzu myth and tweaking them to their own devices or whatever. So
is it like the literary version of "My Dad Can Beat Up Your Dad" or
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
that's
okay.
Right. But the thing is, by using, again, this is what Eminem does, right? Eminem does this. I know I keep using it, but I think he's just so good at it. By saying things like, you already know who the fuck you are, Kelly, right? And you can hear R. Kelly in the, that sort of witty, but you can tell he's definitely referring to R. Kelly there, obviously. But those types of references, the person that's in the culture that recognizes that draws on that tradition and those ideas, and then recognizing them says, oh my God, Marduk is even more powerful than Ninurta. That's look at the comparisons between them. So anyway, the Hebrew Bible is doing the exact same thing.
See,
Yahweh. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm so sorry. No, you're good. I was just gonna say, a modern allegory for that to me would be Mormonism, because there's centuries, millennia past, and it's an adaptation using previous devices with massive changes so that it's almost unrecognizable, both in concept and in in the history. but it's like building on top of that. So it needs the same, in order for people to believe it is the same God or gods or the same
Yeah.
group of gods, you would need to build upon the foundation and not just
Yeah.
wipe it out whole cloth.
And I mean,
Like reimagine it.
Yeah, and I mean another like real aspect to this, I think, is that like imagine if you watched the movie Robin Hood Men in Tights.
I did. I don't have to
Right?
imagine. Yeah.
So, and but you watched it and you hadn't seen Robin Hood.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Now, would you appreciate it? Absolutely, right? It's hilarious. But knowing the movie, you know, and is it Kevin Costner? Who was
Yeah.
it? Yeah. Like, you know, picturing him pulling back the bow, like, and they're playing on all of these things, you know, or those movies like Don't Be a Menace to South Central while drinking your juice in the hood.
Yeah. It
If
hits
you've
harder
seen
if you're
Juice-
familiar with the original material.
Yeah, it's like there's something that you're drawing from that makes it richer and fuller. And I guess what I'm saying is, for the Christian, my God, recognize that that's there, because then if you go back and read those Akkadian texts, you read those Sumerian texts, and you go, oh my, now it makes sense what's going on here in Genesis 1. Now this makes sense.
Well, wasn't one of them written by a priestly author and the other one was written by a, I want to say poetic, but I think I'm going to draw the wrong word. Did I even come close there? I've been reading your book, whether or not you can tell.
Yeah. So basically what they would say is that everybody agrees that there's priestly material in the Pentateuch.
I got that one.
Priests.
Yes. Okay.
And then you have non-priestly
Okay.
material. So, you know, everybody agrees on that. Everybody. And that's right. So Genesis 1 is written by it's a priestly source, and Genesis 2 and 3, non-priestly material. And they're very different, but recognizing that and try, you know, when you try to harmonize things, right, you end up saying things, I talk about this in the book, but you end up saying things like when a skeptic says, when Genesis 1, the animals were created first, and then humanity's created, and humanity's created together at the same time. But in Genesis 2, man is created, and then the animals specifically to meet a purpose for him. And then only after that purpose isn't fulfilled is Eve created, right? So which one is it? And you end up having scholars have to say things like, well, you know, maybe God obviously created all the animals, but then maybe he made a whole bunch of special animals in the garden just for this purpose. You're like, no, he didn't. Right? The text is very clear about this, but that's apologetics, right? But if you can just step away from that and just say, I'm just gonna go for the sake of argument for a little bit with consensus scholars. I'm gonna just go with it for a little bit, and then interpret the text from that vantage point. My God, it becomes so much richer and full. I mean, it's just there's no, in my opinion, there's no comparison.
Cool. All right, I'm gonna shift gears for a second. I want to know what argument, after an atheist reads your book, are you hoping that you will see be less prevalent amongst, you know, dummies like me, like atheist counter apologists who are, you know, roaming around the Twitterverse and the YouTube sphere and hosting call-in shows? What counter to an argument or argument itself would you like to see abated by familiarity with your book?
You mean is it one that I would like atheists and skeptics to stop using?
Yeah, like you see atheists and skeptics using it and you're like, oh, that hurts me. You guys.
I think the one that does the most harm, and I don't want it to sound like when I say this that there are lots of these, because I actually don't hear lots of cringy arguments coming from atheists and skeptics.
Oh, you're hanging out in the wrong circles then, because I do all
that may be. But the one that I hear that I'd like to have nuanced a little bit
you're so diplomatic.
is the Exodus 21:20-21 gives a master a manual on how to beat their slave within an inch of their life and get away with it. Like that's what the Bible's doing. Its intent is to give the master like a hey, here's how you beat your slave up real bad and get away with it.
Right.
That's what this law's for. It's not. Like, let's not say that. Oh, please. Because it's very clear what the text is doing. And I understand why these arguments come up, right? Because that one in particular, it's absolutely true that the result of that law was a loophole, a gross loophole through which a master could get away with doing some pretty bad things.
Right.
Right. And
like owning a slave to begin with.
Right. Yes. Obviously that.
Yeah. And then beating them within an inch of their life. And if they get up in a certain amount of time, then you're good.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. So, but what I would say is when you can give some ground, I find that there are times that that's a good thing to do.
Right.
Like to say, yes, obviously, the law in Exodus 21:20-21 is in favor of the slave, right? It's to benefit the slave. That's the point. It's to mitigate abuse. That's why it's written, right? In the same way that in Deuteronomy 21, when it talks about if you have a captive bride that you want to take, the law is there to try to do something better for that woman, for that girl.
Yeah.
Right. Now please, everybody, don't mishear me. That's rape, right? There is no consent of that girl to get married. What I'm saying is that if you come to the text and say that God's intent here was to make sure that that slave could be abused as much as possible, that's not the intent of the law. The intent of the law, to that very low degree, from our standards, rightly so, is to try to mitigate the abuse of the slave. It's to hold in tension the right of the master to beat their slave. And not just the right. I mean, if you read the Proverbs, it's the like, obviously you're going to do that. You better do this. Otherwise the slave's going to become insolent. Right.
Right.
So you got to be able to beat him. You need to beat him.
Yeah. No one likes an insolent slave. That's what I always say. That's going to get clipped.
Yeah.
That's going to get clipped.
But the thing is, I think for me, you and I know you and I always talk about this sort of thing, like elevating the conversation.
Yeah.
Like for me, what I find is that if you give, if there's ground to give, if there, like, yes, that's true. Oftentimes, not always, obviously, maybe not even most of the time, but the other person the apologist won't argue so vehemently against you and plug their ears so vehemently, because you're trying to say, look, let's just look, what is the text saying? What is it doing? What are the data points? Right. Now, if you want to say, for example, in the slavery argument, if you want to say that God is just slowly working with humanity, slowly bringing them out of slavery, and it just took until 2,500 years later in order for him to do that, fine.
But in your book, no, you can't. Even your book counters that, because you actually talk about the New Testament and what it says about slavery now too.
But that's why
your
I said
old book you didn't.
Years. Yeah, but that's why I say twice. You have to say 2,500 years.
Okay, right? So you're not talking about the New Covenant. Let's just be
not
clear.
at all.
Okay.
definitely not. Definitely not. Because it's so like this idea that the New Testament suddenly is like slavery bad, like as Joe Baden would say, miss me with that shit. Right?
Yeah.
If you want to make the argument that God waited until like the abolition of slavery and he was just doing it slowly, fine. I think that's totally wrong, but that's a theological conclusion that I don't know how I disprove that, except to say, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Especially considering there's still slaves throughout the world in places that aren't the West. So
yeah,
he didn't fully wash it out anyway. But
yeah.
Anywho, we're starting to accumulate questions. So I have one more question for you. What was your favorite part of the book to write? Like just for you, like yourself, and why?
I actually think writing the first chapter, where I just summarized, like I went through the narrative of the Old Testament, and I didn't do this necessarily for this reason, but Seth Andrews pointed something out as he was reading it.
And he reads it it's like listening to melting butter.
It's amazing.
It's amazing. He's made for this.
Yeah, he really is. There's no question.
Yeah.
But so what I did is I basically just said, look, let's just go through the story. Let's forget about stuff like here's 8 chapters about the tabernacle being built and what size the rings are supposed to be and what kind of curtain is supposed to go. Let's just leave all that stuff out, right? What's the story? And when you do that, like the reason that I was doing it is because so often atheists and skeptics, like that 1 Samuel 15 example that I gave, if the apologist pushes back, which they always do, well, do you know who the Amalekites were? If you can say, yeah, let's go to Exodus 17. You want to take a look? Who are they? Right?
Yeah.
Well, if you know the story, if you know the narrative, not the history, not, what is the archaeology? What is it that the canonical form of the text is what's the story that it's trying to tell? And if you can identify that, because that's what they're using, that's what they're going with. Right. And so if you can identify that and engage with them on that level, well, that's so, to me, well, it's so beneficial. But the thing that Seth pointed out was that he has such a tough time reading through the Pentateuch, just reading through it, because you start getting to all the begets,
and the lists of rules and how to build a tabernacle and
right. And here's and out of the tribe of Naphtali, here's 46,300 people are taken in the census, and of the tribe of Gad, 27,000. You're like, right? But this allows the reader to sort of cheat a little and get the story. So then if they go back to the Pentateuch, or when they go back to the Pentateuch, they can recognize, right? I don't recognize this section. Let me just skip ahead a little bit. Okay, good. Here's where the story is. Here's where the narrative picks up. This I recognize. Then once they go through it like that and they've got the story really, then they can go fill in the gaps. And all right, let me just take an hour and kind of go through the tabernacle stuff here, because it actually is interesting. You just, not at first, I don't think. So that was really a lot of fun to do.
So what can we expect in the next book? Because this is part 1. So is there a part 2? Is there a part 3? Do you think what do we expect in the next book or books?
So the way the book is laid out, each volume is laid out the same way. So the first 3 chapters are introductory, bigger picture stuff. And then the remaining 4 chapters are hot button issues.
Okay.
Specific stuff where we dig deep.
Okay.
So the first chapter is always telling the story of the Old Testament. In book 1, volume 1, we went from creation until Moses dies just outside of the land of Canaan. Joshua's getting ready to go in. Volume 2 will pick up with Joshua and the conquest of the land, and we'll end.
You still have a lot to cover from there, dude.
That's right. Yeah. It'll end with
ambitious.
The death of Solomon, right? Just before the monarchy is divided. And then volume 3 will pick up with the divided monarchy, because there will be 3 volumes. And we'll go to the return of the exiles and the rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem and everything. So that's the first chapter for each one. Then chapter 2 is always about history. So in volume 1, we do history from a Mesopotamian perspective. And it goes through, from the 3rd millennium down to like 300 to Alexander. 3000 to 330, roughly. Volume 2, we'll do it from an Egyptian historical perspective. It'll be a little more narrow. I'm not going to go much into the Old Kingdom because it doesn't play as much of a role in the Old Testament. But I'll do Egyptian history. And then in volume 3, I do Syro-Palestinian history. So looking at actual very specific history to the region of Syro-Palestine. And then the 3rd chapter is always about archaeology. And so in book 1, I go through all the basics of archaeology and how it works, actually what they do out on the site when they dig and when they draw and all that stuff. Then I talked about biblical archaeology and the progression that it's made. And then I give some test cases, some examples of how archaeology can be used to help us understand the Hebrew Bible. So I do the Canaanites and the Philistines in book 1. In volume 2, I'm going to look at the conquest, like what archaeological evidence do we have for the conquest account and the formation of Israel. So what do we actually see in Iron Age 1 and Iron Age 2 Israel, and what transitions there? And then book 3, I'm super excited about. I'm working with Kip Davis. If you know Kip, I don't know if you met Kip.
Well, I've never met him, but he's frequently on Digital Gnosis, and I watch that channel. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Super brilliant. Dead Sea Scrolls expert.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're going to go through the archaeology and content of the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's going to be phenomenal.
Cool.
So I'm really excited about that one. And it'll be good because I have Kip Davis.
I want to know where I'm going to find my Numbers 21 test for the unfaithful wife, so that I can.
That will be volume 2.
Yeah.
Volume 2.
I need that one.
So I'll try to remember. I don't remember all the topics off the top of my head. But
don't do right by me, Josh. I need that in that book. You need it in there.
I know volume 2. I remember volume 2. I do a chapter on the Exodus. So I just wrote that. I really like it. I think it's going to be really good. Everybody, I think, is really just going to.
Did you know that there's wagon wheels in the Nile, though? So obviously.
Oh, snap.
So whatever you wrote about was wrong.
Yep. The thing is, just so everybody knows, like, nobody thinks that's true. So, so I have a chapter on the Exodus, and then I have a chapter on prophecy and apocalypticism and messianic texts. So Isaiah 53, Psalm 22, all that stuff. I'll go into all that. Have a chapter, and that chapter is just going to have like a general introduction, like what is prophecy and how does it work. Then there's a chapter on like women's rights and issues of sexuality. So rape, homosexuality, like adultery. So that's where the Numbers 5 passage will come in. And what's the last one? Violence and genocide. Yeah. So
what's a book without a chapter on violence and genocide?
If I could remember, I'm remembering some of the book 4, and I'll say them quick before I forget. My MS brain forgets them. I'm going to do a chapter on flat Earth, like the biblical cosmology and ancient Near Eastern cosmology.
Cool. That's interesting.
I'm going to do a chapter on giants and the Nephilim. Right. Going to do a chapter on. Oh, come on, Josh!
Look how excited you are. I love it. I know. I can completely relate to you. I sometimes mid-sentence just change stream because for people who don't know, Josh and I both have multiple sclerosis. So if our conversation ebbs and flows in all different directions.
I've been super impressed with us.
I know, we nailed it. High five.
Okay, so
when we last spoke,
I actually texted a screenshot of the outline to somebody. So, the sex crimes, in book 2, issue 4 is called sex crimes. So rape, adultery, homosexuality, and abortion.
Mm-hmm.
And then in volume 3, plagiarism. So some of the stuff that we've been talking about.
Okay.
How did the Hebrew Bible use ancient Near Eastern texts?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll really focus in on Genesis 1 through 11. Then hot button issue number 2 is Old Testament laws.
Oh.
Were they so much better? So I'm going to go through ancient Near Eastern law collections,
Got you.
how they worked, how you see them in the Hebrew Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And then, was there a flat earth in the Hebrew Bible? And giant problems is what I call issue number 4, stuff with the Nephilim. So yeah,
Cool.
It should be good. It should be good.
I'm very excited. Everybody in the interim should get this book in the description down below. Okay, people are asking questions and I'm
Awesome.
being selfish. So, okay, so Ben, I'm going to start from the bottom. So Ben Lemuro, I'm so sorry, says, I'm throwing money at the screen, but books aren't appearing. That's because you have to throw electronic money at the Amazon shopping cart screen.
Just so everyone knows, like it's a hardcover book. It's pretty big and thick. And so we had to price it for that. So it's $34.99 to get the hardcover book. But because it was I don't think that's expensive. I mean, it's like 460 pages, I think.
It's not, Josh. Stop undervaluing your work. It's annoying.
But sorry.
Stop
But
doing
because of that, we wanted to make sure that everybody could get a copy of it. So the Kindle is just $9.99. So
And also,
we priced it for that reason.
You can get it on
under the name
and listen to
Ashurbanipal
that.
II
Listen to
in
that.
610 BCE. The
Audible.
Median Babylonian coalition was able to drive
like a
him
warm
out of the
sweater.
city of Haran.
Isn't that nice? It's like a warm
And
sweater.
What's brilliant
was
about how Seth did this is he was so meticulous.
Mm-hmm.
I have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of text messages from him
I don't doubt that at all.
where he's reading through and he just types out the name, or the like the word like Ashurbanipal, what he just said there, or Asher Ubalit. And he's like, he just types it out with a question mark. And I would hit the little audio recording thing. At first, I didn't do that. At first,
Did you try to write it out phonetically?
I did the speech to text button. So I sent it back to him and it typed it and sent it. And I went, wait, that doesn't really help him at all, does it?
Wait, this might not be helpful. All that is to say, I'm a strong endorser of, I'm also dyslexic too. So it's easier for me to listen and I can listen while I work. So if financials are an impediment, then it's less expensive to get the Audible version. I think it was only like $20 or something on the Audible version. It was significant. Yeah. So, and you get to listen to Seth Andrews read it to you.
It's worth it. Like, who cares what I'm?
Who
cares what
is
the
he
book
even?
says?
What does it say?
He could read the dictionary to you.
Right. Was it about the Bible? I can't remember. What was it about? I don't know.
But I feel all warm and fuzzy.
That's right. Why am I so turned on right now? All right. So Hosier, buddy, $10. Thank you. Another great interview talk. I'm so glad Shannon figured out how to sit in a chair again. So this is gonna happen. That's somebody who follows me on Twitter. I made a vulgar joke on Twitter. There was a pastor who was saying that women wearing pants is turning them gay. And then it was this little video. And he used the example that once women start wearing pants, they don't know how to sit properly like a woman in chairs. And I was like, that explains it. I've been going head first. I've been going Superman. It's all these goddamn pants I've been wearing. If only I'd known sooner. Oh, Apocalypse Here. Oh, that's other Laura John. Hi. Apocalypse Here is another really good channel. Heart you, DJ. Aw, bromance. I'm assuming it's John, I guess. I do wonder how we judge whether or not a prior text is actually being echoed or activated. The intertext debate is quite active, as you know. Oh, that sounds like Laura.
Yeah, one of the cool things, actually, David Carr, that guy I mentioned, has a really great article on methodology in that edited volume I was talking about. And one of the things he talks about is blind motifs. So blind motif is where, if anybody doesn't know, sorry, I feel like I said that like people don't know that, and maybe they do. Anyway, it's where you have something that's being borrowed from the source text, from the original thing, but it doesn't fit in the new text, in the receiver text. Like it doesn't work. Like you never see that with Eminem, I don't think. Like he always, when he brings it in such a way that it always works in his song. But there are times that you see it doesn't. A really great example of this, just very quickly, is in that Anzu myth I was talking about before. He's fighting a bird. Ninorta, the god, is fighting a bird. And when he wins, the text says, let the feathers of Anzu, the Anzu bird, blow back to the gods to like announce your victory, which makes sense with feathers, right? Well, in the Enuma Elish, Marduk is told, let the blood of Tiamat blow back through the wind to the gods. It's a very clear pull from the Anzu myth, but it doesn't work with blood. Blood like doesn't waft through the wind like feathers do, but they're pulling it, but it doesn't make sense in it doesn't fit. So they call that a blind motif, and that's pretty strong evidence of utilization of another text. That's one of the things. It's actually really complicated. It's definitely not my field, all the specifics. It's not my area of expertise, but get that book. Guys, if you're interested in that, it's awesome.
Oh, it's interesting. Cool. So M68 Ken says, happy to catch a Shannon Q stream even if I'm late. That's okay. It's cool to be late. Better late than never. And also it will be up afterwards. Anybody can watch whensoever they desire. Oh, yeah. I've been trying to be very serious with you all stream. Josh and I have known each other for years, so it's very difficult for me not to act like a moron when I'm talking to Josh. Not to just make really like inappropriate inside jokes that nobody else would get. All right. So, hi, John, Godless Engineer. Thank you for the super chat. Says, what does Dr. Josh think about the prevalence of statements of faith at an academic level?
Yeah, it can be real problematic, I think. And I won't mention any names, but I know someone who isn't working at a job that they used to work at. I actually know a couple of people. And like I get the rationale, right? We want students that come here to know that this is what they're going to learn. The problem that I see, and I feel comfortable saying this, having gone to several of these schools, is that it really does, it creates like academic incest. Is that a good way to say that? And when you don't have these challenging ideas, it shouldn't be, do you adhere to, I don't know. I say I shouldn't be. I haven't thought about this deeply, but the potential problem, I'll say that I see, is that when you have somebody that says, I won't go outside of this.
Right. You're purposefully constraining academia.
It does. And you end up with edited volumes that I have up on my shelf that I have to read through. And I don't want to read through them because I know that I can't trust what they're saying. And so when you have theological commitments, it can be very, very problematic to being able to fully engage with the data points, because you end up with a model that at the end of the day, you have to make it fit that model. And the one example that I'll give very, very quickly is in Exodus 12:37. It's one of the places that talks about approximately 600,000 fighting men on foot went out of Egypt in the Exodus, which does not count women and children. So it's one of the places that, like, if you just go with conservative estimates, 2.5 to 3 million people in the Exodus. Well, that's what everybody thought, right? Everybody just, I mean, that's what the biblical text says, 2.5, 3 million people. Well, then, last 100 years or whatever, it's become clear that New Kingdom Egypt has like 3 million people in total, best estimates, right? You can't have the entire population of Egypt leaving, right? That doesn't make any sense. So then what do you do? Well, if you don't have a theological commitment to the historicity of the Exodus account, you go, oh, okay, well, like we can work with this. It's a text that's written later, and so what if they get the numbers wrong? Who cares? Like, okay, so who cares if it didn't happen like this? Is there a cultural memory or something? You can start to think outside of the box a little bit. Not outside of the box. That's not what I mean. Think critically and just let the data points fit a model easily, I guess.
Right.
But what you end up with is that people say, well, maybe 1,000 doesn't mean 1,000.
Right. They start to have to kind of
Maybe that
reimagine.
Maybe it doesn't mean, maybe the Hebrew word elef there, which is 600 elef, maybe elef means like a military unit. So then maybe it's just.
But wouldn't that have
military
compound
units.
and knock-on effects in other places where that
I
word
write
is
all
used?
about it. Yeah, I write all about it in the chapter, the problems with it.
Yeah.
But that's what ends up happening. And the people that are making those arguments are people that have theological commitments. It's not because they think, oh, there's a really good other way this could be translated. It's coming at it after you. And they say it. Like they say it. We now know that 2.5 million people can't be a real number. So we have to figure out. And it's like, no, you don't.
Yeah. And
There's a different way.
And just because you have a statement of faith doesn't mean that you're doing bad scholarship. But I do feel as though it's, a yoke around your neck to a certain degree.
Is.
Right? Where you're not saying I can't trust you because you signed a statement of faith. We're saying, well, because you signed a statement of faith, that's constraining you also, right?
It's more like, for me, it's more like somebody like James Hoffmeyer, for example. Brilliant Egyptologist. But when you get to the Exodus, like when his radar turns and it comes to, like, there are certain things when these very brilliant scholars that do phenomenal, Kenneth Kitchen's another phenomenal Egyptologist, does phenomenal work. When they get to this area, their writing becomes suspect to me. Right? And it's
because they're looking to affirm a personal conviction, maybe you think, or
well, like James Hoffmeyer writes about the Exodus. That's what he writes about.
Okay,
and he writes about it from a fairly apologetic viewpoint, right? And it's scholarly apologetics. There's no question about it. Mm-hmm. Like, I think you need to take James Hoffmeyer seriously when he talks,
right?
But I still think he's wrong, right? And so,
okay,
but that's what I mean.
Well, that's a good thing to work through because you see a lot of people on both sides of the fence, I think, talk about it. Like, there's a lot of things that both atheists and theists can do a lot better in the general discourse. I think almost anybody with, ears who's been around or eyes who's been around can agree on that.
Yeah.
And that's probably one of the things because people like to go, here's my guy, and I don't trust him because, here's my guy, I don't trust him because, right. And yeah. No, it's a good point. Good to address.
There's a saying that I have all the time. I'll shut up. Saying that I have that I use all the time is if it's something like that, like here's my guy and I disagree or I don't trust him. It's never that simple. If you think it's that simple, you probably don't understand it. And I find that to be true very, very frequently.
That transmits over a lot of different concepts.
Yes, no doubt.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, we still have more super chats. You guys are very super chatty today. Thank you for that. I guess Josh is interesting or whatever. Who would have known? Who could have guessed? Didn't see that coming. Could Shannon get Dr. Josh to stop trolling me on whatever streams I'm on? This is from Jay Patchett. Are you stalking? Yes, are you stalking Jay? What's wrong with you?
Jay probably can't even ground the instantiation of the necessary impossible possibilities of the ground of all being. He probably can't even do that.
Oh, everybody can do that. It's cheesecake. You know that. Everybody knows that. All right. So, Coach Frankie, have you ever debated anyone making light of slavery, then claiming slavery was worse than the Egyptians were? Oh, sorry, worse when the Egyptians were the masters, like Old Testament. I have debated someone who has made light of slavery. It's on
Almost
this channel, actually.
That's almost every debate I've been in has done that.
I don't understand how you can do it, though. Like the cognitive dissonance required to be able to contort your perception of ethics and morality, to say the Bible's not even saying that when it's just so plainly written.
Well, I say this in the book, like, I think it's dangerous. And the reason that I think it's dangerous, just very, very briefly, is that everybody always says slavery in the antebellum South is nothing like slavery in the Hebrew Bible, right? That's always the first thing that comes out in every debate. And in some respects, that's absolutely true. But those respects are what actually happened, the atrocities that took place. They're not anything like what's seen in the laws of the Hebrew Bible. The problem is if you compare the laws in the antebellum South to the laws in the Hebrew Bible, they're pretty goddamn close. And that's scary because if you then go to the Hebrew Bible and defend these laws,
Yep.
those that forget the past are unfortunately doomed to repeat it. And
it also puts you... Sorry, go ahead. Go.
I was just going to say, I talk about that. I write about that in the slavery chapter of the book. So,
and it also puts you in a position as a human being where you're debating the merits of iterations of slavery. Like you kind of have to acknowledge that it is slavery, and then you go, but this isn't like the bad kind because of the context.
Shannon, there is a brilliant TikTok video about this. It sums it up better than I ever could. And it's just Jeff.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know him. Yeah.
I can't remember
if his account's still up, his account gets taken down like every
Yeah, right.
day.
I think the name of his latest account was like, please don't take this down. It'll
still get taken down, but yeah.
But it's very short, but he's sitting in front of his computer and he calls an atheist friend of his and says, like, hey, Sam, can you think of a time when it would be okay to own another person as property? And the atheist friend says, no, that's what? That's crazy. I can't think of any time that'd be okay. And he's like, oh, okay, thanks, man. And then he calls a pastor friend of his and says, hey, can you think of a time when it might be okay, a circumstance where it might be okay to own another person's property? He says, yeah, so I guess if it's consensual, and then he fades, and you see Jeff like over here reading a book or something, and then he's like sitting over here like this, and the guy's still talking, giving these different reasons. It's so funny.
Yeah, if it's indentured servitude, apparently, like they're volunteering to be slaves. You didn't realize that
that's okay.
Like, but what about these ones that were born into slavery because, or these ones that you're allowed to buy from the lands around you? What about those ones? Oh well. That was different because they were probably bad and you were doing them a favor because they were probably going to be poor because you just ransacked their town, and now you're just doing them a favor because now they get to eat because they live with you now. Like, what?
If you are listening and you hear these arguments, that the chapter of that book deals on slavery, deals with all of them. They're dealt with also in that Did the Old Testament Endorse Slavery book. So, between those two, it should answer any objection that I've heard.
I mean, I've never heard a good one, but I've heard lots.
Right.
Various
That's true.
Qualities of bad. I think we're out of questions. I guess you stopped being interesting. That's probably because I started talking more. That's probably on me. Everybody knows that I'm completely uninteresting. I am hype that you came here today.
This is great.
Everyone on Earth, if you were in this chat, how many people are watching right now? So there's over 300 people watching right now. And if there's not 300 people buying this book tomorrow, I'm going to be wild, okay? Every single one of you, go buy this book right now. The link is in the description directly to Amazon, so you can buy the book. Also subscribe to Digital Hammurabi because they're pretty cool. Megan's actually better than Josh. Don't tell Josh I said that.
Much better. Megan's the cool part. Right? Let's be honest.
Oh, another question came through. Are you okay if I answer this question? I'm sorry. You still have time, right? Okay, cool. I don't care if you don't. I'm still going to make you stay. If God, this is from Blue Eyed Chipuya. If God destroyed Babel for trying to reach the heavens, by that logic, shouldn't he smite every plane that takes off that might reach? That's a solid point, actually. Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos must be screwed right now. They're like...
That's the penis ship, right?
Yes. Oh my God. I'm in a group chat with you, and I was like, did Jeff Bezos just launch a penis into space?
Yeah, it's probably because you're a pervert, Shannon.
You couldn't resist it, could you? You couldn't go a whole stream without a Kent Hovind impersonation. Josh is also a rapper, in case you're interested in that. And he's the world's foremost Kent Hovind impersonator. Apparently that's a title that can be held, and it is held by Dr. Josh Bowen.
It's not a sought-after title, believe me.
We made it so far. We did so good for so long. We should probably just leave now. All right, I'm going to throw up my end screen, and I don't have music yet, so I just talk over it because I'm not a professional at all. And go buy Josh's book. If I don't hear that there's a huge bump in sales of Josh's book tomorrow, I'm gonna be absolutely wild with every single one of you. And I love you, and thank you for tuning in. And I didn't mean it. I really love you guys, and thanks. And as always, help elevate the discourse. Bye.